So the question is, are our expectations way too high? Or is it simply that we need to raise our standards? And what exactly does that mean and what it looks like? Well, you want to watch this episode because we're going to talk about expectations versus standards right after this. What is mindset? Our mindset is based on what we believe, and anything we believe in, we put into motion. I have spent my life putting the mindset of perseverance into motion, and now I am here today to share my journey along with others whose mindsets have changed the course of their lives. Hi, I'm mindset coach Lorraine Lindsey, and I believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. So are you ready? What's up, y'all, and welcome back to another episode of The Mindsetters, where we believe that if you can change your mind, you have the power to change your life. I am your host, Coach Lorraine Lindsey, a certified peak performance and life coach. Before we get started with the show today and I introduce my wonderful guest, please do not forget to hit the subscribe button. Give us the thumbs up. Let us know you like what we are talking about, or send us your comments. We love hearing from our audience. And again, thank you for the continued support. Today, we are back in house with the fabulous Lipstick Ladies. I love our roundtable talks because we talk like we do when we're out having dinner or cocktails or whatever. And we're tapping into expectations and standards. So before we get into it, let me introduce my first guest, the fabulous Miss Carmen Smith. Carmen Smith is a local realtor and entrepreneur here in the Las Vegas Valley. If you want to get a hold of Carmen, you can reach her at Carmen_Smith_ for purchasing a home, selling a home, or just contact her about some of her business endeavors. She has a lot going on this thing. Mm-hmm. And of course, we have, again, another great friend of mine, Miss Charlene Ruiz. Charlene Ruiz is a mortgage broker or a lender here in the Las Vegas Valley for 20 years. And she is also a fitness coach and a mindset coach. I think we all are kind of mindset coaches in our own way. It is your time. I always mess it up.
To be fit coaching. You're right.
Your time to be fit coaching. And also, too, if you're looking to get a mortgage and or refinance your home, you can contact Charlene at sruiz.cmps. Ladies. Hey. Thank you for being here again. I think this is a fun topic because when the inception of this show, which took place in the kitchen or in the dining table of my house where I used to live, with an iPhone and a really bad microphone.
And a beautiful chandelier.
Yes.
And a beautiful chandelier and wine.
Yes.
And then Kwan was like, come to the studio. And I waited and waited. Now here we are. And it's definitely been a wonderful, fabulous journey. But one of the first things that we talked about on that episode were expectation versus standards. And I've been kind of going through the archives and I looked at that show and I said, you know what, that was a really, really good topic that we discussed. I think a lot of us think that expectations and standards are interchangeable. We kind of confuse them for one another. So I kind of want to break it down so we can understand what expectations are, if whether or not our expectations are set too high, and whether or not we actually need to raise the standards we set for ourselves. So let's go right into it. So standards versus expectations. You like my little cartoon? I have to get creative sometimes. So what are they? What is standards and what are expectations? A standard is a level of quality that represents the norm. So that is collective or personal, right? So whatever the normal standard is by our accounts of life, right? And that could be different culture to culture, person to person. The expectation, on the other hand, is the belief that something will and should happen or be in a certain way. So to break that down, let's talk about standards first. Let's just go right into standards. And you ladies, take it away. What do you want to say right out the gate about standards?
I'd be interested to see the shows back to back because I haven't seen that show. So how our perspectives have changed on
that's
standards
true.
and expectations. Standard is definitely personal. What I believe is my bar that, everything has to meet my standard for me to accept it. Expectation is what I expect from somebody else or even from myself, and it could be ego-driven.
Same thing. I think standards internal, foundational, and expectations outward, external. So a standard is something we set within ourselves, for ourselves. An expectation is something we have of something outside of ourselves that we want.
And I look at standards, when I think of interchangeable words, I would say it's your core value.
Mm-hmm.
It is like you said, the bar in which we show up, right? And then that's usually the level in which, or it should be the level in which we allow people to be in our lives.
Right.
Because you're always going to meet people who are not necessarily at the same level of standard that you are, but the people that you tolerate, especially in your most intimate life or in your business world or what have you, should at least meet at minimum your level of standard, because that's how you're showing up. You kind of want them to show up the same way. And I think some of the greatest disappointments in life are based on expectation.
Yeah.
Especially when we're not willing to raise our own personal standard. Sometimes we won't raise the standard, our bar is low.
We'll lower our standards.
Or we will lower our standard
Yeah.
for someone, but we raise the expectation of, you need to do this for me. And sometimes what we want people to do for us isn't what we're willing to do, you know? What do they do as I say, not as I do?
Right.
My mom used to say that all the time. It used to drive me crazy. So, okay, so I put a couple little questions, and we can kind of just talk freely, but just to kind of stimulate conversation. So the first question I said was, how do we raise our standards? And I guess with this, it's like, well, how do we first gauge what our standards are? Because I don't think people cognitively think about their standards in life. Some of it's passed on generationally, and you just, you know, whether it's traditions that you have or the way you greet a person when you say hello or opening the door, just your manners are can equate to the level of standard. So how do we raise standards, and how do we first identify what the standards are?
I think self-evaluation. Even like I'm noticing, what are my standards? What is, you know, like you go through life, like you said, and you have certain standards of how you treat people. But what really is my standard when I introduce people into my life? So how do we identify? I think self-reflection is the first thing, and really identifying what that means for you as far as how you want people to show up for you.
Right.
When I hear what you're saying, I hear boundaries too. For some reason, it comes up in my mind. I think standards are like the non-negotiables that we put on in ourselves, and how do we want our life to look like? And that's a standard of my life and everything about that. So a standard is almost like an internal compass that tells us, if we want to go here, there's nothing less than this we can accept for that. Or, you know, whether it be love in your career and yourself and your looks and your decor, whatever. My standard is at minimum this. And then when it comes to people and standards, it's a matter of boundaries. If you meet my standards here, then you get to come on this side. If not, there's a boundary line that doesn't allow you to cross that layer of standard.
I think that's key what you just said. And actually, when you guys were discussing your definitions, I started thinking about, if you don't really know where your standards are, check in with the way people are in your life and how they show up. Because that's a big indicator of where your standards are, what bar you have. If you're in like personal relationships, for example, where you're kind of a pushover, or people walk all over you, they take you for granted or take advantage of you, that indicates that you need to raise your standard. People are walking over you because the saying goes, and I say it all the time, is we teach people how to treat us. And if you're not sure where your standards are, it's like, okay, who's in my life that means the most to me? How do I feel that they treat me in my life? And why have I deemed that acceptable one way or another? And often it lies in, but they're going to be better to me, or you create an expectation there, whereas really you need to raise your standard. And it goes to what you said, Charlene, and creating boundaries. Part of you having standards for your life is also having very healthy boundaries established with people, no matter who they are. And I think sometimes, even like, especially when it comes to family, right? I think sometimes in a dynamic of family, sometimes we lower our standards because we feel or we put the expectation on us that we're supposed to be a certain kind of way just because they're mom or dad or grandma or even your children. And even in those relationships, you have to raise your standard and create healthy boundaries, especially when you're dealing with a situation where you're being disrespected.
Yeah.
How would you measure standard and quality?
Well, I would say, that's a good question. I would say for me, I always measure I always measure standard by who I am and the quality of me depending on the persons that I show up for. Because I'm not the same quality person for everybody in my life. I am not. even in my business or my work world, there's certain customers, and it shouldn't be this way, but even when it comes to clientele, there are certain people that I don't give the same quality of
Yeah.
service to. And yet they have an expectation that I deliver the same. And then it should be, I should raise my standard and say, no matter what, I should be like this. But then again, it goes back to the boundaries of saying, well, no, just because maybe this customer is provisional, they're lucrative, they're good for my business monetarily speaking, they're not good for me emotionally. And so just like I need to have a standard of service, I also need to deem what quality customers I want in my life, as an example.
Because it boils down to your quality of life.
Right.
What do you want that to look like?
Right.
And
To go back to what you just said about like how you show up for people, I think that was a really powerful statement you just said, because sometimes we get like, I'm this, I'm that. I always treat people this way, and it's true. We don't. Nobody does.
Right.
Like I have certain friends that if they call me, I'm there. And then you have other people, they call you, it's like, oh, well, you know what I mean? It just is what it is. So does that mean that our quality is bad as a person, or it's just,
yeah.
we still hold the standard, but we can't be that for everybody?
Well, there's a resistance in allowing certain quality of people in your life because of the quality of life you want to have, which is based upon a standard that you put into place. So it all boils down to identifying what that is and then creating that standard for yourself. So to your point too, lucrative maybe, but I mean, for some people, their job is more than just that. I want to connect. I want to make sure that if I'm investing my energy further than I need to, up and beyond, that there is an exchange of that. And there is a difference between, some people say how you do one thing is how you do everything. I don't believe that to be true.
No.
I believe that we learn in life how to show up that makes sense for not just yourself, but for the other person at that time too.
In our business too, we've learned, like, when you have a client that is gonna go through with the transaction versus one, they're not. So you do have a different standard for each client. You're not going to invest the same energy. And I don't think that's a bad thing.
But
I
you
think
have to
it's just,
quantify,
that's
yeah.
boundaries
Yeah,
too,
for sure.
because you can't waste your time and energy on everybody.
And that's where it's like, it's getting the clarity. And when you said that expression where how you are one thing, you are in everything, I actually do believe that is true. And I think that a lot of us don't want to believe that, but I do believe at the core of who we are. Mind you, like outside circumstances can create you to mold and kind of become a chameleon to things, or it's some adjustment. But I think at the core, who you are, if I'm a person that is, I see everything through to the end in my relationship, I'm going to do that. I'm going to have that same kind of thing in my work world, whether I'm an entrepreneur, I'm going to see that.
That's ethics.
But I think when they say who you are in one thing is how you show up in everything, I think that it means essentially who you are at your core. So if I'm with a person at work and they're short with me and they're disrespectful and they're hot tempered, you better believe they're probably like that at home. They probably treat their family members like that. They're probably that person in their friendship, because that's who they are at the core of them.
I was thinking more in how you do one thing is how you do everything. Who you are is who you are. The efforts that we put into certain things may change depending on what that is.
But you're a perfect example of that. You're a very disciplined person. You can look at you physically and see that you're very disciplined. You show up at your work and you are disciplined in your work. When you go to your events and you do your workshops or you're doing fitness and training people, you have an expectation because you show up with that standard. So you are that person in everywhere that you go.
No,
build
because
up to
Charlene
that.
told me, what'd you say when I was like, well, would you train? She's like, look, I take it serious, and she's like, you're not going to take it serious, so let's just not even go there.
Well, it is a mind thing
Yeah.
too, and it also really depends on what the ultimate goal is. Like, you put me in a basketball court, I mean, I'm sure I can learn the game, but that's not my gift, and I'm not great at that.
But your gift is one thing, right? What you actually can do talent-wise, but the grit and the effort you will put in, that's where you take. That's what you take with you.
Once
That's
I
the
say
backpack
yes.
you carry
Yes.
everywhere.
Right.
So if I'm someone who doesn't have any ambition, I'm just not really an ambitious person, it's going to show up in every aspect of my life. And I think, again, when we circle back to expectations and standards, let's just say my standard bar is low. A lot of people who walk around with low standards walk around with high expectation.
Yeah.
because they want the outside world to feed them so they can feel that so they can get their cup filled by other people. And, and then they deplete the people who have the higher standard. And so it's just a matter of how do you find the balance? I want to go to the next question real quick because I don't remember what it was. What should we expect from others versus ourselves when it comes to standards versus expectations?
What do we expect from others?
What should we expect from others versus ourselves?
Well, Tony Robbins says to change our expectations to appreciation. That's something that I learned early on. I don't expect anything from anyone, but I mean, I expect to be kind and to receive kindness. I expect, like the basics, but if I don't get it, that's not a disappointment to I don't have an expectation that's strong.
But is that true?
I've had expectations
because I think it depends on who we're talking about.
I'll just talk about like relationships. Like I know, like I've been in places where you don't say this is my expectation, but just repeat, like self-analyzing myself, looking at patterns to where I expect a person to show up a certain way, and when they don't, I'm disappointed because they didn't show up, but they didn't even know that I had the expectation of them, whatever it may be. And that was an insecurity in me, where my standard may not have been as high, and I'm looking for this person to elevate me because they have something that I think I need, and I need them to pull me up.
But is that a standard or an expectation?
Well, the expectation was for them to pour into me to raise my standard.
So it was in the receipt of whatever that was.
Right. But the expectation I put on somebody may not have even been, how do you expect somebody to bring you up? You know what I mean? That's internal. You have to do that internal. Right. So I don't know what kind of example I can give, but maybe you're dating somebody and they make promises and they don't come through with their promises because they're busy or whatever the case may be. And I get so disappointed because you didn't come through with your promise. Because I had an expectation, which I should have the expectation of the
promise. But the expectation's there because her standard wouldn't do that.
Right, exactly.
And so this is where when
that was a terrible example, though.
No, it's actually a good example. Yeah. It's like, okay, let's just say somebody says, whether it's a relationship or a business partner, whomever, and they say, I'm going to do this for you, or I'm going to show up. Right? And they are telling you they're going to show up. And then they don't show up without real cause, or it's something that is a repetitive thing. They're flaky or they're unreliable. But you're the kind of person that if you say you're going to show up, you are going to show up. So there lies the expectation. My standard is when I say I'm going to show up, I will show up unless there is something that is so out of my...
And then I'm going to communicate it to you that I can't show up.
So that's the standard. The expectation is that you give me the same respect that I give to you. That is the expectation. So we all should have expectations, but the expectation should be met where we are. How we show up should be, I expect someone to show up like me. Now the question then lies, if a person doesn't meet the expectation, aka the level of standard in which I show up, what do you do? Right? Because not everybody's going to be at your level of standard.
Right.
But how you accept that person into your world makes all the difference. Because if you're not careful, when you have a person and you bring a person into your life that is not in alignment with what your standards are, aka your core values, you will lower your standards without even realizing it.
That's true.
And then you'll end up walking around life wondering, why do I feel out of alignment? Why is everything going bad? Why am I unhappy? You're questioning what's going on, not realizing that you've lowered your own standards. So when you lower your standard, now the people that come into your life, the circumstances that come in your life are on that vibrational level, and you didn't even realize you lowered your stuff. That's why we have to get very careful about understanding what our standards are, lining them up with what our core values are. There was a great, and I'm going to mess this up a little bit, but I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember how it happened verbatim, but it was a talk that I watched, and they illustrated about core values. Okay. So as an example, let's just say for me, I were to write down, what are my core values? What are the top 5 things that are super important to me? Okay. This is good for people out there listening. You write down the top 5 things that are important to you: family, work, my children, fitness, taking care of myself, mental health, whatever that looks like for the person. And now I look at that list and I say, okay, now I'm going to put it in order of importance to me as it stands today, right? Because our lives are interchangeable. We change, we grow, our list changes.
I hear priorities.
So you make it a priority, your course, and you say, family is very important to me. Why? Because I'm looking for a family. I have a family. I'm raising a family, whatever that reason may be. Self, my health is important to me. I had a health scare, and now everything is in alignment with that, and so on and so forth, right? And we put it in order. Now I'm at a table with a group of people, okay? And these people in the room seem, in my mind, a little bit more important to me. Maybe they're more successful or more sophisticated or whatever. And on my list of core values, family is number one, but one of the person makes fun of my family member. But because I feel insecure at that table, instead of me excusing myself or defending that person, even though they're number one on my core value, my standard list, I laugh along with them. Now, for some reason, I don't feel right because I just took what was alignment to me and I compromised it to get some security and some acceptance from the outside. And we do stuff like this all the time, where we know that certain things in our lives are important, they're in priorities, and then we meet someone who is fulfilling a void, or we get into a business or business relationship with somebody that we think is smart in this, and our insecurities and our fears take over, and then we become out of whack with what we know is true to our core, and then we lower our standards. And once you lower your standards, I feel like your world can fall apart.
Yeah.
Because then your boundaries are all over the place. You get chaos. You know things are not right, but then you don't know how to build it back up. Because now sometimes we lower our standard for people we think are important in our life that aren't important. We you know what I mean? I'm sorry, I'm rambling about this.
No, this is good. I mean, that's a priority list for me in my life. And if anything I do matches with my priorities, then it's invited in. If not, then that's where you stay. So I see what you're saying there too. I think that we also learn in each one of those experiences too. When we're sitting at that table and someone, instead of defending, we're laughing, perhaps we're positioning ourselves in what this might be so that we can show up in another way the following time, so sometimes it's a matter of processing who's around me truly and then engaging so there's a way to learn, and then next time around, I mean, that's how I'm hearing in that too. But if it happens all the time, every time, then sure, there's a problem with that.
And it was a silly example, but I think that your standards should be unwavering, right? Your core values, if your family or your friends or priorities in your life, and you set and you have and you define that in a certain way, you shouldn't compromise what you know to be true about self. And I think often when we have voids, which we all do at different times in our life, and we meet void fillers, sometimes we compromise things because of the fulfillment, the false fulfillment of the void filler.
I think I've shared the story before. For me, the place where I waver the most with standards, of course, is relationships, matters of my heart. So learning, like I remember being in a relationship where the man I was dating was murdered, and then I got in a relationship really quick because I was so like broken, like I was scared to be alone. And I just kind of jumped into it, and there were so many red flags in the beginning, and I mean, almost controlling, like don't talk to any of your exes, or don't do this, don't, with my kid's father, just all kind of things that looking back, like, why did I even put up with it? But I compromised with all of that because of what I was feeling, the voids I was feeling. And when that relationship ended, it was like, oh my God, I'm the victim. He left me, he was my savior type thing. And I really had to evaluate myself at that point. Like, why did I need somebody to save me? Why? That was me putting an expectation on somebody else. And that's probably the biggest example I can give from my life. But as far as realizing the expectation and lowering my standards to even compromise how I ran my household, and you find yourself in those situations not knowingly, you don't just go into it, say, I'm going to lower my standards. Just whatever you're going through, it kind of just, but I was messed up, not him. I was messed up. He told me what his expectations were, whether they were right or wrong. I just agreed knowing that wasn't something I could do. So I think the biggest lesson for me was really just being still and quiet in it, and evaluating myself.
You said it there, the lesson in that's part of our growth.
Yeah.
Sometimes we don't have a clear understanding of our standards, and we put it out there and we learn from that so that we can level up or reset and get back to whatever that core is. Like, like always having a clean house, like always having my bed made first thing in the morning. Like those are kind of things that we're taught when we're younger, but it's a standard of how we live because that's just how our life has been. I can't walk away unless that's done first. Standard for me. But in relationships, I think that's all. As long as there's growth and lessons, and it's not like next time you're doing it again, then I suppose that's part of that.
And I think also, and this is a big one for me, and this is something I've really had to learn because I am Mrs. Great Expectation. Okay, let me just be fully transparent. I put a lot of expectations on people in my life. I hold myself at a high standard in my brain, okay? Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But in my mind, the standard is, like I show, like this is who I am. Boom, that's it. And the expectations that I put on people are high. But what I'm learning in my growth is that expectation creates burden. And if I have someone that I really love and care about, and I know that they are meeting their level of standard and maybe they have some growth to do, and I put an expectation on them that sometimes is unrealistic and unfair because I need them, want them, they must be this for me, it becomes a burden, and they're never going to be able to fulfill what I want and need because I'm looking for perfection sometimes that it just isn't there. Instead of, like you said, instead of expectation, having gratitude. And when I've learned to kind of sometimes take a seat back and say, there are certain expectations I expected, but these are within reason. But now I want this person to be somebody that they're not. I'm expecting them to show up the way I want them to show up because it's the way I think and feel. And now what I've done is I've created, especially if the person really cares and they want to really fulfill that person, I've created a burden on them and it wears them down. It's kind of like what she said in that relationship she was in. He had an expectation of her that caused her to lower her standard and to change her core values, right? But because she cared about that person, she did what she felt she needed to do to meet his expectations, which, by the way, they were never going to be met.
Right.
Because he had his own issues and his own low standards for his own life. So instead of him raising his standard, I'm going to make every person in my life be expected to do.
Yeah.
And this is why people think it's interchangeable. Because I think if I put my expectations on you, then that's my standard. But that is so outside in. That means that I am giving my power away because I'm telling you, I expect you to do this. And that gives me a false sense of control over a person. And then I'm going to beat them down if they don't meet my expectation. But I'm never willing to raise my standard and be that first. And this is where I love these conversations because I would hope that when people are listening, they're thinking, okay, shit, maybe I am putting a lot of expectation on this person, or maybe we do it to our kids.
Yeah.
There's an exchange value to everything in relationships too. So this is the exchange I expect because I'm giving that. So understanding that too, and sometimes you don't. Sometimes you do find yourself lowering your standards, your bare minimal of what you accept for an exchange that may or may not ever.
But I'm gonna go back to the kids thing. As just a little small example. We raise our children and we could yell and scream and fuss and act a fool. And we do all these things that these little human beings are sponging and soaking up and becoming. But yet then we get at them like you expect them to do this. Well, you need to raise your standard and demonstrate the person you want that child to be. Instead of yelling and screaming and carrying on and pitching a fit and trying to control them, why don't you raise your standard of who you are as a person? And so that way you're being the example for them. Yes, you're going to have discipline and you're going to create rules and boundaries and you're going to teach them manners and things like that, I hope. But you still have to show up a certain kind of person before you expect other people to show up like that for you.
And is the expectation that we set on people, is it ego driven? Is it, I need you to show up this way to make me feel better, for me to look better? Like, we have to check our expectations as well as our standards.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
What was the next question, Kwon? So how do we manage expectations? What's a healthy way to manage them? Because I do believe, like you had said earlier, you're like, I don't expect anything from anyone. I'm not that great of a person. I have expectations all day long. I do, you know.
And that's just to prevent disappointment, because I think you walk right into disappointment when you put out expectations, because we're all imperfect.
But you're never not going to have expectations,
I mean,
right?
I guess expectations for me is kind of like a strong word.
Okay.
You know,
It
like
is a
that's
strong word.
yeah. So for me, I may, you know, I mean, there's an understanding of what the exchange may be if I
Okay.
do this, do that. But if I expect that and nothing else, to me, that's really strong.
Gotcha.
So
So then how do you manage it then?
I don't put that strong of a I don't put anything strong to anything outside of me that can disappoint me. So perhaps maybe
love
I allow
that.
myself to be in a place where if it happens, great, wonderful. If it doesn't, that's going to be okay too, you know. But if I'm being hurt by somebody, I'm not going to keep going back to be hurt either, you know.
But that's great, because that's an expectation you put on yourself.
Correct.
I think those are more manageable. I think
Yes.
when you have a level of standard, I think the best way to manage expectation is to manage your own, right?
Yes.
So it's like, all right, and what you just said, okay, if somebody is mistreating me, or they're hurting me, or they're being abusive or taking me for granted, the list goes on, right? Something that doesn't align, it doesn't feel good, and you know it's a bad thing. The expectation for me would be then, okay, this person's in my life because obviously that's where I was in my life. It's time for me to level up and create an expectation for myself to create bigger, stronger boundaries and start to push people out, you know. And for me, I love what you said, actually, to maybe even change how you define it. Say, okay, instead of saying expectation, because that's such a harsh word, this is what was the other word you used? Like
An exchange.
An exchange. I do this, I need this, and and then you do
Is
this.
it understood exchange of, yes.
Yeah.
Value
and
of
if
energy.
you don't, then whether it's business or whatever, we got to part ways, right? Like you're in lending or whatever, you have an operations team. You're the salesperson. But when you get in contract for a loan, you have an exchange that needs to take place, right? I would call it an expectation, but this is good. You have an exchange that says, okay, now I need my operations team, the underwriters and everybody to do their part so we can close this deal. And if they don't fulfill that and they fall short, then you know that, okay, the boundary is here. You're costing a client their home. I will no longer do an exchange with you.
Yeah, but the expectation to that example is to close the loan. So
Right.
there's a grand expectation through that funnel of exchanges. So that's a great example in that depth. And that's also how we see different circumstances too. So, I mean, as a married woman, you should have an expectation of your spouse that makes sense to that relationship based upon the exchanges you've built up at that time. So per a few of our previous conversations, someone shows up that way, you expect them to be that person, right? And then one day they're not, something changes, and I expected to see the same person again, but it looks like you might be going through something right now,
Yeah.
you know, or then I see right through what that might be, you know?
So what happens in a marriage? Because we talk about, you know, eliminating, if people don't meet our standard, then you just eliminate them. But what happens in a marriage? Like, for example, I got married young. Things changed over time. You know, expectations changed. How do you, is that lowering your standard to bring that person up, or try to bring that person up to understand?
There's questions that I
You know what I
come up
mean?
with.
Like,
Yeah,
how
of
do
course.
you navigate through that?
I think it's a communication thing. And I think you can't, like the languaging that I heard you use was how you get them to raise up, but that's not, it's not
Yeah.
something you can do,
Right.
but through communication, because you're right. You know, we are not the same people we were 10 years, 20 years ago, because we are evolving people. Our life, our circumstances, our experiences change and evolve the way we see and perceive things. And that can happen so much in a relationship when it's gone through its course, right? And so that's where the communication and both parties having to be willing to communicate without creating great expectations. Because I struggle with that even in my relationship now, because it's an 8-year relationship with a lot of on and off again and a lot of different things. So every time we've gotten back together, sometimes the problem rises because the expectation became great. I'm expecting you not to behave this way like you used to, that caused us to be this. And he's expecting the same thing, when really it's about managing who we are today and being able to let go of certain things, but to communicate why things bother us, how we want to grow together, and what's the path we need to take to get there. And sometimes the answer to that is just to part ways.
And I mean, there is sacrifice in life. Not everything great comes easy. So sometimes we do have to think about that as well. And, sacrificing, I mean, standards, I don't feel should be sacrificed truly. But when you're in a marriage or parents, or sometimes for the sake of the other person, because you know where they're at, you can see that, and you know that with or without them, your standard's still going to be there. You may sacrifice a moment of your standard.
But I don't think sacrifice means to give up a standard, unless your standard is a shield. Okay, so this is something that I think we have to be careful with. I think sometimes we create standards that are really protective mechanisms. They're our warrior clothes, so people can't get close, or because we want to control something. And so what I mean by that, if I am not necessarily sacrificing, but I'm compromising because I love that person, and there is an exchange of love.
That's a better
right?
word. Yeah.
Yeah, because sacrifice is a hard word.
Yeah.
I mean, I got to slay a part of me
Right.
so they can have their way,
Right.
almost like. But it's like, no, I love this person, and that person is dynamically different than I am. They're this way. Their standard is this, and my standard is this. But what we do know, we love each other. Maybe we don't like each other right now. But how do I compromise and give a little bit, and then they give a little bit, and they give that give and take? Then you're not letting go of your standard, because your standard is your standard. Like I said, it's your core value. To love your family is important. So if your family's falling apart, that standard to try to fix it is still there. You're not lowering your standard. You're saying, this is the standard, but it's the foundation's falling apart. What is the communication that needs to happen here? And what am I willing to compromise to make this feel fluid? Because I think sometimes we're so steadfast in who we are that we don't want to bend, and sometimes we need to. And we think that's a standard, and it's not. It's usually because we're afraid that we're going to lose control.
And sometimes perception, how we perceive situations, can create, depth in certain things differently than others, So again, to your point many times, does everything have to be so deep? No,
I'm like, yes, on this show.
Yes and no. Yes and no. Yeah, but I mean, again.
Can we just listen to Charlie Brown
right.
sing Christmas songs?
Yeah. Wah, 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 wah. Yeah.
Okay, what's the last? I think there's one more question. There's two more. Okay, so should we surround ourselves with higher standard of people?
Yeah.
Is that really what the issue is when it comes to our standards? And what does that look like?
I think it's healthy to be around higher levels, higher standards.
Absolutely.
So we can, I think that's how we grow and become better in life, and to what standard, right? Are we better? I mean, that can go layers and layers and layers. Well, we don't know what we don't know. Once we start to know, then our eyes start to open up differently. And, that's part of growth. And I believe in the world of success, we have to level up in order to get to that next place.
That is the truth.
You know,
when you are around level up people, you level up.
Yes.
You have to, because you don't want to, at least you either going to level up, or you're going to be like, this is too much for me. And you're going to back out, and you're going to go back to the people who make you comfortable. But it's intimidating for people to be around level up people.
Yeah.
Whether it's because they're more articulate and they're more, educated, let's say, or they're more successful, or they have more money, or they have stronger relationships, and they're not dysfunctional. When we're around people, if we find people, and you can't be like the pesty person that's just like, I gotta find these level up people, and just like and be intrusive, but you have to look at subtle ways to, like, for example, I just came back from a conference. I'm in a room full of level up people. Everybody's there because they want to learn and grow. And just innately, by booking the ticket and showing up into the environment, I end up in conversations that were thought-provoking, that made me want to expand my business. And it just happened just because of the room and the space, and everybody's in it. So sometimes, whether you're finding a church and a community to belong to, you can belong and find level up things, but it will make you level up. It'll make you uncomfortable. There will be some adaptation to that. And also, too, it'll also make you start to see other people that you've kind of kept in your circle different. And they're going to feel and notice the change in you, too.
What's even greater is when your light shines so bright that those people that were behind you come up with you, because that's the other side. And that's when we get to know who we really are. that's a standard.
But they can't. But you have to be careful with that, right? Because you're exactly right. But you have to be careful that they don't become balls and chains. Because there are times, even in my life, where I want everybody. Where I've taken classes and I've gone to these powerhouse things, and my brain is like,
happens
boom.
organically.
You come home and you want to grab everybody around you, and you want to take them with you on this journey, and just not everybody's there. And I get myself into trouble a lot because my life has been a very unique life, from poverty to being an EMT and seeing people die in my hands and learning medical stuff, to traveling the world and meeting billionaires, and all it sometimes happening at the same time. So I've met so many different types of people that my brain and the way that I think, because I've been around so many different types of level of people, that I want to bring everybody up to that standard. And it's like, Lorraine, that's where you're at because of what you've experienced in life and what you've seen, and the people not everybody is right there with you. The people who want to go, they're going to get there, but you got to let them go at their pace. And I have to learn that too, to kind of scale back sometimes, and not want to force them up to the level.
Your light will lead them there on their own. You don't have to ask for anything, just by being you. I feel if they're supposed to be in your life and you're growing into that, they'll follow in their own way. But you're right to that point. Come on, if there's an opportunity, I see it, you can see it too. Let's go. Maybe, but not. You're right. It's not fair to others or yourself. You can leave little seeds and see how, but through you.
And not everybody has the same path, and not everybody's meant to do the same thing and have the same journey, and not everybody has the same vision, or and it doesn't matter.
We
you
all
gotta
have the
let
same
people be
equalizer,
in their lanes.
Well,
I'm learning that.
And two, doesn't mean that a person doesn't have the same ambition because their numbers aren't the same. Like my level of success might be, I want to make $500,000 a year. Your level of success might be you want to make $1.2 million a year. And it's like,
that's great monetary.
But that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
We don't want to get those lines confused just because a person doesn't have that. Like I always say, I am really leaning towards purpose-driven things, and I know that doesn't make a lot of money.
Yeah,
And I feel like it doesn't. It can, but I'm just saying, like, I have other ways I can make more money.
Force, right?
But I just feel like purpose is more important at this stage of my life. So that's my success, though. Doesn't mean that I don't want people to feel like just because they don't want to run a big giant company or
success
something.
Success is individual too.
Yeah, but it's more of a mindset, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Success
you don't
is
want
really truly fulfillment.
Yeah.
That's when you're really
so
successful.
You don't want people to feel like, well, I don't, I'm happy doing this or having a regular job. I personally never had a clock-in job, so I am grateful for that. But a lot of people don't understand what it takes to go to work, and if you don't go to work today, you don't make no money. You don't have nothing to fall back on.
An entrepreneur every day wakes up unemployed, right?
Right. And
so what's I'm sorry,
scary.
while you're saying that, put the last question up. I want you to finish your thought, though.
No, it's okay.
Do high, and we've got like, I don't know, a couple minutes. Do high standards equate to high expectations?
I think so. Yeah, because if your standard's high, you're going to have a higher expectation
for
yourself and for other people that you invite in your life. If I go to work every day and I get a man in my life that's sleeping on the couch, my expectation is higher than
I'm not going to man.
Exactly. Yeah. So I have a higher expectation than that.
But that's key. What Charlene just said, when when our level of standard goes up, certain people do not even enter the door.
Yep.
They don't even enter the gate. There are, and I've seen it with my own life and my own transitions in my life, who I was, eons ago or whatever, and realizing through experience in life and even the way I present myself and the way I put myself together, that's a level of standard that maybe I didn't have, like at some point in my life. But there are certain people, they don't even get through the door.
Yeah.
I could have a 30-second conversation with them, and we will leave it right there. And it's very clear. And you know what's weird too is that some people, like when we were out the other night real quick, and I walk in and we're at a cigar bar. I'm walking in my own little world. I got my cute little dress on, whatever. I sit down, and the two gentlemen came and sat with us that were former clients of hers. And the guy says to me, yeah, I wouldn't even come and speak to you in this room. And I was like, really? And I was like, well, why? And he goes, well, you just carry yourself in a way that says, if you come talk to me, you better come correct. And I started kind of laughing because I'm like,
I like that.
It's not even something I'm
Girl.
thinking.
That's just you.
But there is still even a level of standard that shows up when you walk into a room. Now, I'm not hoity-toity and full of myself. Anybody can come speak to me. I'm really super chill. Honestly, I am.
It's your confidence, yeah.
But I don't even know. I'm literally just looking for a seat.
Right.
But I'm just saying there is something that I've worked on in my life that even when it comes to a man saying, I'm going to come talk to her, he's thinking, I got to level up to go talk to her. And I like that.
Yeah.
But
that
that's because there are certain people that I'm going to talk to that I see that might be a powerhouse in the room. And I'm like, I need to position myself to go and talk to them. And that's okay. So
I have an add to that. So at some point in time, your standards will change the expectation to an unsaid agreement when you come around, when it comes around to the people and your environment. Like, it doesn't have to be an expectation; it just is. It's kind of a natural thing that is, that you don't even have to think about that unless it's not. And then you're like, okay, well, then process of elimination comes in. Either you fooled me in and I need to check my standards because how did you get into this? Or you changed. Something changed
Right.
within you.
that's a good point. It's like, who did I let in the door? And my son calls it the hotel, right? Mama, you got to treat your life like it's a hotel. There's a doorman at the door. Who you let in means everything. Some people stay in the lobby. Some people get to the first floor, and only a few may ever make it to the penthouse.
I like that.
But you got to check people at the door.
Yep.
And the moment you start letting scrubs up in your hotel, you know what I mean? Once you lower
Smart
the value,
kid.
once you lower the value of what your room cost, you get a totally different crowd coming into your place. And that's how we have to see ourselves is, who am I? What's my value to people? And how do I show up in that value? And if I start to get people who don't treat me right, then I'm not valuing myself quite as good as I thought. So how do we want to conclude this? Standards versus expectations.
Go ahead, Charlie.
I mean, just to kind of end how we started, standards is an internal thing and expectations is what we expect. It's an outside job in. Standards is an inside job out. And that does change as we grow. And some people are supposed to be around and others aren't. And certain environments are supposed to be there for us to keep growing into our standards. And some are there to teach us what we don't want. So we just got to pay attention.
I'm going to do a brain dump of my standards. That's going to be homework for everybody. Do a brain dump.
Yeah.
What is identify what my standard really is for my life, especially for the relationships I bring into my life, friendships, love relationships, and get clear understanding of what I will allow, what I won't allow in my life. And my expectations check, are they ego driven? Do I show up the way I expect somebody else to show up for me? So I think just real self-evaluation for standard and expectations of my life.
Yeah, I think that's great.
Identify
I think
them.
everyone should absolutely do it. I did that actually recently. I wrote down a list of my core values, like everything I could think of, and then I picked top five, and I didn't waver. But to say specifically, and I'm going to circle back to what I just said, my last point was, I think your level of standard has also a lot to do with what you feel your level of worth and value is. And what I mean by that is not who you, not what you get from people. I'm worth this, so you should do this for me, versus I am this, and this is what I'm willing to do for other people. And that is unwavering. I am that person. I will show up this way because that is my abundance. What you do with that is not my business.
Yes.
But how I let that be received into my life is every bit of my business. And really
1,000%.
checking yourself, checking in at the door. Who is allowed in? Who is allowed out? I can serve people who don't have the same level of standard because that is my abundance, and that's how I give. What I get back, I don't care as long as I march to the level of standard.
Yep.
And if you start having people in your life that are sticking and staying, that are not treating you right, that's because you do not value yourself.
Amen.
And you need to level up and raise your standard and your expectation for yourself.
Yes.
So
yes.
that's it.
That was
Good
good.
conclusion.
So thank you guys once again for watching another episode. Again, if you like the content in the show, give us a thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. We're almost at 1,000. Woo-hoo. So excited. And thank you again for watching The Mindsetters. Until next time. Ciao.
Bye.
Bye.